In this video is the email filing, installation, and configuration for the client side, part 1. We're going to focus on the core aspects of the client side installation and some of the default settings. The second video will cover some of the optional features and advanced configuration. We are going to make sure that our client machines have at least Microsoft.NET 4.0, and if you're using a 64-bit version of Office, make sure you do have the DM API 64-bit installed as well. I have a client machine here that's all set up. I've got DM10 patch 1 installed on it, and I've got the email filing 4.3.1 version, client files downloaded. We are using a 32-bit version of Office, so I've got the appropriate files ready to go. The first thing we're going to do, as I said, make sure we've got those prerequisites, which I made sure of before this video started, just for the sake of time. And again, I'm using a 32-bit version of Office, so the second piece does not apply. And the first thing I'm going to do is come in here to email integration and check to make sure that I have these settings in place. In fact, let's just go through our client deployment utility and set those. This was done in the previous video on server-side components, so if you've watched that, you may have already done this. If not, this will be new. You just log into the client deployment utility as a eDOCS supervisor, come to the email integration, and you can see here the profile form needs to be set. There are options available. Make sure you use the appropriate one that you want for your mail environment. If you don't see the form that you're trying to use, it was probably not selected in library maintenance for the groups or for the group that you're logged into. So make sure you go in and set that in library maintenance inside of the group. Click form, and we'll come here to MS Outlook and we'll see that that's checked. If you don't see your form listed here, likely it's just not selected in library maintenance. The header fields can be set similar to how you see this here. They may be slightly different in your environments. What this is doing is telling the email filing service to take the information from the from header and save it into the email_from column in the profile table. You may have a different column you wish to use, or you may have created your own, so this may look a little different, but this is the standard settings for how you want your registry keys to look. And we can confirm that these are in place. The registry location is HKey local machine, software, Hummingbird, email integration, 1.5 settings. Then will be your library name. In this video, we'll be using a library called OTEFlib, Open Text Email Filing Library. And we can see the correct form is there, and we can also see that the correct field mappings are here as well. So we've got the correct registry key set. And as you can see, I had exported this earlier for use on the server. So those are important registry keys. It is worth noting that the blind carbon copy field, the BCC, is set here, but the email filing service does not recognize this, so this does not need to be set. But I do have it set in this environment. Okay, so now that we've got everything set up and prepared in advance, we are going to run either the MSI or the exe file. It does not matter which you choose. And you have to give it the work path that you wish to use. I often come back to my email filing service, pick any one of these, the marker manager, the email filing service manager, any of them should be using the same work path, and put it in right there. This is stored in the registry. If you put in something wrong or you don't know the work path at the time of installation, you can leave that blank and go into the work path registry key inside of local machine, software, IntelliGo, and I believe it's under the email auto bulk filer, maybe email filing. Let's double check that. And somewhere in here, email filing work path. There it is. It's under HKey local machine, software, IntelliGo, email filing is a key called work path. So if you don't set it there, you can always change it there, or if you need to change it later on. There's 3 options when you're doing an installation. You can choose typical, you can customize, or you can do a complete. We'll choose custom just to show you the 3 options are the email marker component, the email auto bulk filing piece, and the email filing assistant. In this instance, we're going to install all three of these. And choose install. It's not normally take too long. Hopefully it'll take just a moment for these to install. Okay, it's finished installing. And we will go ahead and launch it. Now, there's a few other things that we'll want to do. In fact, let's do those first. We'll come into the registry. Here, when we set the registry keys, there's a very important registry key in settings called Use Message ID. You'll want to make sure this is set. It needs to be set on the client machines and on the email filing server as well. This registry key basically controls how the unique identifying information is saved into the DM database for each email. So it's very important that we have this key set here. Another registry key that we'll want to set is going to be in... Oh, well, actually, let's launch the service first so the keys get created, and then it'll be easier to change them. And I want to show you the difference in that key as well. So we'll launch the auto bulk filer. As you can see, it's waiting for DM to be started. You can change the amount of time that the system will wait to be started. There's a registry key, and you can find that in the documentation as well. And in fact, DM's not started, so it's probably why it's waiting so long. Okay, so as you can see, this is the bulk filer interface, and the first thing I want to do is show you real quick what the default configuration is as far as how the files are stored when you create what we call jobs or add folders to be monitored. So in this instance, I will add an Outlook folder to be monitored. I have a lot here, so we'll just randomly pick this one here. And my computer is going a bit slow. I apologize for this. And we can select whatever metadata information we need to. This is a new library that doesn't have much, so we'll just go with defaults. I don't have any subfolders, so I don't need to include it, but I can if I'd like to. I can go ahead and monitor this folder right away, or I can choose to leave this blank so I can have the job created but then go back and tell the service to monitor the folder at a different time. I'm going to go ahead and check this box to monitor it now. There is a registry option that you can read in the registry guide to have this monitored box checked by default. Okay, so now I've created a job, and by default, if you make no other changes when you create this job, what's going to happen is the files associated with it will be saved locally here inside of your user's app data roaming folder. And if we come into templates, we'll see this profile.dat. This holds the metadata information, and this list data folder holds the link config file, and this link config file is what holds the list of monitored jobs, and it actually references that DAT file that holds the metadata information. So that is saved here on the local workstation by default. We recommend not doing this. There's a registry key that can be put in place to where this information will be stored on the email filing server in the work path. There's a number of reasons to do that. It makes it easier for administrators specifically, and there's a number of features that can only be taken advantage of if the information is being stored on that work path. So what I'm going to do is delete this existing job, and that will remove all those things from the library. And I'm going to exit out of here and come back into the registry. And now there's my IntelliGo key, email filing. But what I need to do is create a key called email auto bulk filing and a value use server config. And as you can see, there are three options for this. 0, which is the default, stores job definitions and template locally under the app data roaming folder. You can set a value to 1, where it stores job definitions and templates under the work path and the network user. Or you can set it to 2, which does the same thing 1 does as far as storing the information on the work path. However, this will tell the service not to run anything locally, but to use the Exchange connector. So for right now, we're going to set this up with 1 and do everything locally, and then later on we'll go back and change it to 2 and show how to use this configuration if you're using server-side components. It's a D word. We're going to go ahead and set that to 1. Now when I launch my auto bulk filer, and give it a moment to connect here, much faster that time. I'm going to come through and add this folder again. Use default values. Go ahead and monitor this. Hit finish. And now if we go over to our email filing server, you'll see the work path which we created in the first video. Work path here, and you'll see the list data folder has been created here, and inside of there is a subfolder with my user ID, and inside of here is my configuration information. So that registry value, setting it to 1, moved all of that stuff over here. It's worth noting that if you have existing jobs and then you make that change, that information, those DAT files, do not get moved over automatically, but you can manually copy them from the user's local workstation and just paste them right here into this folder. As you can see, there's a number of buttons up at the top here, and there's others that can be enabled, which we'll discuss in more depth later on. But to briefly go over what's up here, the start button will run automatically. Edit allows you to change things. The DM profile allows you to change the DM profile. This allows you to copy a job. This deletes a job. This will refresh the list. This copies the jobs to a clipboard. This is an interesting one. It validates the profile data. If for some reason you're not sure if the profile data is actually valid, DM, if you think it might have been disabled or something, you can select that in the Filing Errors Manager. Not going to spend too much time talking about that because it's not those come configured by default. However, we will come into the settings and continue our configuration here. The category field is going to be the temporary text that you wish to be set on an email after it's initially touched by the auto bulk filer. Now, this is temporary because it will only last until the email gets saved to DM and the marker service is able to confirm that it's saved in DM, in which case we will have a more permanent mark. So, bulked is often used, pending, something of that nature, whatever text you want. Like I said, this is just something to let the user know the email has been sent to the work path and will be saved into DM very soon. And we can click these ellipses here, and I don't know if it'll work since I don't have Outlook open actually. It might just take a little bit longer. Okay, it worked. So you can choose a category. You can come in here, and this is the category column in Outlook. I like to create a new one. Use the same text, bulked, and pick the color you want. It doesn't really matter. We'll go with green because that's my favorite color. And OK. And now as items get grabbed by the auto bulk filer and copied over to the work path and they're waiting to be saved to DM, there will be a bulked temporary category text and it'll be marked green for the users. This is all optional. You don't have to do that. There's an option to load at Windows Start. You can check that here or uncheck it. There is a registry value. Load at Windows Start. You can set that through the registry under HKey current user. Oh, this is for the mail, sorry. I'm sure there's one for the auto bulk filer as well. There you go. HKey current user software, IntelliGo email filing, and load at Windows Start. So this option here is just a registry value you can set manually, or you can use it through the GUI interface. You can set the schedule on how often to run. You can tell it to run every 4 hours. You can choose more frequently, less frequently, depending on your needs. You can tell it to run at specific times or on a specific hour. Instead of running periodically, you can just tell it run every day at 3 a.m. You may want it to run when you're leaving work for the day, user's discretion. But these are your two options for choosing scheduling. You can choose to add the selected folder automatically to the email marker, which is a handy feature. We'll look at that a little bit more later on, but it prevents you from having to select the folder both in the auto bulk filer and then have to go over and add it to the marker as well. The allow of reset filed status is also something that can be controlled in the registry. And there it is right there under the same current user, IntelliGo email filing, allow reset filed status. By default it's set to 0. 1 will enable it. As you can see, it shows an option for the user to reset the filing status, the billing information on a folder. So I like to choose to set that. And then set custom column layout. You can choose which columns will appear here if you would like. So currently we have these selected. We could choose to toss in the author ID. And now we see it'll show the author that was set for this particular job. Now, kind of going back to that reset filed status, as you can see, there's now a right-click option to clear the filed status, and there's a button that was enabled up here as well. And let's take a look at Outlook and show you, maybe. Having some computer glitches here. So as you can see, this is my inbox, which I have already in other systems had some of these emails filed, email filing. And this column here, the billing information, is like a flag that the service uses to know whether or not an email's already been touched. What that option I was referring to does is allows you to remove that option from a specific folder, or remove that flag from all the emails of a specific folder. So if you ever need to refile emails that have already been saved in once, that is the option that allows you to do so. And that is the basic configuration of the auto bulk filing section anyway. The thread and subject filing, if you choose to do that, can be enabled with registry keys. They are actually found I did not bring those over. There are sample keys that come with the installation, and I strongly recommend using those if you can find them. Copy this folder over to my client machine. Just paste them in here. And they're all 64-bit keys, unfortunately, but they can be modified, and at the very least we can look at them to see where these things are. Enable subject filing and enable enable thread filing here. As you can see, they include the WOW6432 node, which does not exist on my machine. We can delete that. Save. I should have exited out of here before I did that. And just for some variety, we'll come in here and manually do enable subject filing and set that to 1. And now when we relaunch the bulk filer, okay, subject filing is still disabled. I will take a look at that in a moment. I probably, since I did it manually, put the key in wrong. In fact, let's look at this now. Local machine, software, WoW64, email filing. I don't know. And of course, I did that while this was still in memory, so that's not going to work regardless. Subject filing is still disabled. Okay, we'll focus on thread filing for now. And so the way thread filing works, just briefly, don't want to discuss it too much, but it detects emails that are part of an existing email thread and will save future emails to DM with the information that was saved with the original email. So if you take one email, saves a DM, and you forward or reply to that email, those emails, if they're in a monitored folder, will get scanned and saved into DM with the metadata from the original email. So you can select the Outlook folders to monitor for this. Typically people will choose like their inbox or sent items in this particular instance. You can use this to refresh it. There's some options. You can choose items that are only older than so many days or newer than so many days. You can choose it not to file unread items. That way users don't have to worry about something they haven't read getting touched by the AutoBulk filer and something happening to it. And you can also tell this to run on the same schedule that you have chosen to have the AutoBulk filing system scan. So that's the options for thread filing. And subject filing is actually disabled because I do not have the add-ins enabled yet, so we'll discuss how to use subject filing a little bit later on. It requires the quick file add-in, which will be something in a later video. So the next part I want to go over is some of the optional features that can be added on to the AutoBulk filer, or hidden as the case may be. Wrong part of the registry guide here. Okay, so with the AutoBulk filer, the most important one is this lock status registry key. You can actually come through and set that in order to lock down the settings, so users cannot come in here and change their own settings. Handy as an administrator, because sometimes users can inadvertently make some changes to things and mess things up greatly. The enable validate job data is shown by default. If you want to hide that button, you can set this registry value, or create this registry value and set it to 0. That will remove that button from the interface. Same with the error reporting dialog. Now the use save UI registry key is something that we recommend using if you're going to use the foldering feature, which we'll talk about very soon. But especially if you're using DM10 with the foldering, it can make life much simpler, but we'll discuss that with the section on foldering. As far as things that you can add, there is a number of options. The first is enable copy job from other user. This is not enabled by default. It does require that use server config setting we talked about earlier to be set to 1 or 2. If it's set to 0, this option is not going to work. And it basically allows you to copy jobs from one user to another. So if you have one assistant who has a bunch of jobs set up and she's moving on to another position or another company, you can set up the new user and copy the jobs from user A to user B without having to start them all up from scratch. So that is a handy feature. The enable replace job data feature can be enabled by setting the value to 1, and it creates a button that allows you to scan through all of your jobs and replace it's like a find and replace system. So if you happen to have a client or an author who changes names and you need to go through and change the author on all of your jobs, you can use this option to go search through, look for all the instances where, in my case, T. McMullen exists, and replace it with, T. Smith if I change my last name to Smith. And the last option listed here is the allow run as other users. This is more of an administration setting. It allows you, when you log in, to log in as a different user, and it allows you to correct some errors and do some maintenance as an administrator for other users if you need to. So let's put all these in place just to show you. And unfortunately, I don't have other users in this environment to copy jobs from, but I'll show you the basic interface for it. Enable replace job data is a handy one. And again, since I don't have other users to log into, I won't set that one for login as another user. It's pretty straightforward, though. When you launch the AutoBulk Filer, it will prompt you to select the mailbox and the DM user you wish to use. In fact, we can set that just to show that interface. Alright, now I'll relaunch my bulk filer. And you can see, it gives me options. I can run as the Windows user, T. McMullen. Now these are grayed out because I don't have other options to run as, or I could run as a different Outlook user, or I can manage the errors for a user. Since there aren't other users in this environment, those options aren't available, so I'll just go ahead and run as the user I'm logged into Windows as. And you can see this pops up. There's a few extra buttons. Replace profile data. Let's check that one. And what you can do is pick the field you want to look through. So in the instance I used earlier, author, we would replace from T. McMullen to T. Smith. Don't know why I'd want to do that, but if I did, let's say I had a name change. And you can do it on all jobs or just the one that's selected. In this case, we're going to want to do it from all. Are you sure? Not in this case. And now you see the author is listed as T. Smith. Now this will cause errors because T. Smith does not exist in DM currently, but that would be how I would change the names. And you can do that on anything. If you have a client that changes their name, or if a matter changes name, you can use that on any field. As you can see, you can choose any field that is currently set up. You can also change trustees' names. So that's a handy feature right there. The copy job from other user, pretty straightforward. You choose the list data path. It's going to typically come in here by default. You want to choose the user to copy from. It'll list out all of their jobs, and you can select the ones. And again, I don't have anybody else to select from, unfortunately. And you can choose to move instead of copy. So rather than removing the jobs from the other user, you just copy them so that you both have the same jobs and you're monitoring the same folders. Careful with that, but it can be useful in some situations. But it is pretty straightforward. As I mentioned, you'll just do a search. You would pick the user you wanted to copy from. All of their Outlook folders will be listed here. If they have multiple mailboxes, those will be listed here. You can choose which mailbox, select your folders, and go from there. So those are some of the options that can be added into the AutoBulk Filer to give the users a little more flexibility. And finally, we are going to discuss one last registry option on the AutoBulk Filer. Didn't mean to launch that. The foldering option. This is a registry key that exists in a slightly different locations than the email filing key. There's three options. It's disabled by default. With a value of 1, you can enable foldering. With a value of 2, you can enable foldering but without the replicate folder settings. We'll look into that in a moment. and 3, which is enable use of RM for DM6 instead of folders. Don't worry about this unless you happen to be one of the users using DM6. And in that case, contact support, and we can talk to you about that in a little more detail if you're interested. So we'll come in here. And we'll set that to 1. And we'll launch the bulk filer. We'll run this as myself. We'll add an Outlook folder. Now, I have not created any folders yet in this environment, so that makes it a little more difficult now that I think about it. Let's cancel out of here. So I'm going to take a brief pause while I get a DM folder set up so I can show this to you. Okay, I've created a DM folder, but before I do so, I'm actually going to come back in here. Since I'm using DM10, I prefer to create a registry key called use save UI, which is set to 1 by default. So you need to come in and create it and leave it set at 0. And what this does is it disables the use of the save UI in the wizard. And if you were watching before how things looked, you'll notice a slight difference here, except I haven't exited out, which I need to do. Okay, so now when I go to add an Outlook folder, you notice before there was 3 steps and now there's 4. That's what that registry key change did. And the reason what it does is it adds this extra step in 2, which says, do you want to link to a DM folder? Before, this option was not available, and you could choose the DM folder in the selection window. However, if you're using DM10, it's much preferred, in my opinion, to use this option and give people the option to come in here and use the save UI interface that they're used to seeing in the 5.3.1 environment. And it also allows for the creation of folders. If I had this set before, I could have come in here, right-clicked, and created a folder to use. However, in this case, I'm going to use my OpenText email filing folder I just created. Do I want to edit it's going to go ahead and inherit the profile information. Otherwise, I can say yes to edit it, but we don't want to, so next. Now, this is where the foldering comes in. If I want to include Outlook subfolders, yes or no, and if I want to replicate structure. So enable foldering allows me to link a job to a DM folder. Without that enable foldering option, I would not have been able to link this job to a DM folder. And by setting it to 1 instead of 2, I have this replicate folder structure. And what that would do is, if I happen to have a bunch of subfolders created in my Outlook environment, it would replicate that folder structure inside of DM. In this instance, I don't have a ton of folders. Bill can go ahead and do that anyway, but it will go back through and create some folders inside of DM, replicating for that Outlook folder. In fact, hopefully this doesn't take too long. We'll call that subfolder 1, and we'll create subfolder 2. And create sub 1. Okay, so now we're going to tell it to replicate the folder structure. And so anything that gets put into this folder to be saved will automatically get saved into DM and be added to this folder. So we'll hit finish. You kind of briefly saw down there it was creating the folder structure. There was a brief flash. And if I now come into my DM extensions and I do a search, on folders, you'll see these folders have been created. Here's the top folder, and inside is sub 1 and sub 2, and inside of sub 1 is sub 1. So that's how the replicate folder structure option works and how you enable it. Next, we are going to discuss We're going to discuss the installation and configuration of the marker. The marker's already been installed. We'll just go ahead in here and launch it. Okay, so as you can see in here, the marker by default will monitor your inbox or your sent items. I'm not monitoring my inbox or my sent items, so I'm going to remove those from, actually I can't delete them that way. You can come in here and deselect them, and you can select other folders you want inside of here as well. As you can see, I've got a ton of subfolders created. And now you can also include subfolders, so if I just wanted to monitor a top level folder and just tell it monitor all subfolders, you can do that by checking that box. And as it says, including subfolders can cause performance issues if you have a lot of subfolders. Now again, you can manually go through and add folders to the email marker, or we can come in here, add selected Outlook folders to email marker, which I talked about earlier. Now it doesn't unfortunately go back and add the ones that are already here, but what I can do is if I come in here and that's set from the get-go, as I start adding folders to the auto bulk filer, we're not going to put that to a DM folder. We'll briefly fill this out. We'll monitor it and finish. And you'll see that folder got added to the marker. So if you choose this option here to add selected Outlook folders to the email marker from the get-go, it makes life much easier for the users. Their marker will automatically have any folder that they're monitoring added to their marker, or added to that's what I'm trying to say, excuse me. And you can set here how many days back that the marker will look. The way that the server marker looks is it looks at the date received of an email. So in this case, 9/11/2015 was well more than 14 days previous. So if I wanted the service to catch that, we would need for this number to be increased quite high. Excuse me. Now, there are some settings that can be enabled here. The Actions tab, Change Category, is the most commonly used one. This will be the permanent category text. We put on some temporary category text in the auto bulk filer just to let users know that we're waiting, that email's been sent to the work path and kind of waiting to be saved into DM. This is the category text that confirms to the user that things are saved in DM. And I've already got a flag set up for that. I like blue for in DM. I want to extract metadata from the profile, and I'm going to add the doc number, and we'll go with author. And that's how you add the category text and the metadata on the local marker. It is pretty straightforward. The cleanup rules, if you want to enable those, you certainly can. Didn't mean to launch Outlook here. Just trying to come in here to my keys. I believe there is a Enable Cleanup Rules tab key. Again, we'll need to knock out this while 6432 since I'm using a 32-bit OS. And that key is Enable Cleanup Rules. The marker does need to be closed, so we'll wait a minute to do that. But we can at least briefly talk about it. It's pretty straightforward. You can check this box to delete items that have been DM'd for more than X number of days. So what this will do is wait. When it checks an email, it'll go, okay, this email's been in DM more than 14 days or whatever you have it set to. Let's delete it from Outlook. It's saved in DM. They don't need it in Outlook any farther. You can also add the additional criteria of having Outlook, if of having the email been in Outlook for more than X number of days or having been bigger than a certain size. So some additional options there. You can schedule things and choose to run the service and load it at Windows Start. These are both registry keys that can be found in our handy registry guide. We looked up one earlier, and I believe, yeah, this is it. DM ArcMail, load at Windows Start, or run at Windows Start. These are the two keys. If you want to set those manually through the registry, you can do so there. And now the schedule is how often that the marker will run and how far back it will run. There's two schedules. Schedule 1 is typically used for more continuous monitoring, and it does so goes less far back is what I'm trying to say. Excuse me. Only scan items from the last 14 days. And typically you do this because this is running every hour, so you don't want it going back 365 days every hour, or else the service would get kind of bogged down. So this kind of runs periodically, but it does so quickly. It's only going to look at like 2 weeks worth of emails and mark those up. Schedule 2 will run once a day or so. You can change it, but about once a day is the default. And it will go back farther. You can change this as well. Let's say you want to set this to 60 days, and it'll scan 2 months worth of emails every day and mark those up. So it goes back farther, but it does so less frequently, so it doesn't put as much workload on the system. And the library is the libraries that are configured to be used with the marker. In this case, we only have the one. If you want to export these settings are all saved in the registry. Everything in here is a registry key. So quite often I will recommend to people they go into one marker, set things up, get things configured the way they want, and use this export button to export the registry settings to their desktop. And then they can use that key to import it into another machine, and all these settings will come right in. So you don't have to manually set them through the GUI every single time. You can do it through once and then use registry keys. And briefly, the unsaved items will just mark items that fit the exact same way this works, only it does so with items that are not saved to DM instead of DM, and it gives the option of only doing it on certain items of a certain size. So that's briefly how the marker service is installed and configured. It has some other options which we'll discuss here shortly. In fact, number of things here. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can look at this guide yourself, but the more commonly used ones, the ability to include subfolders, that's a checkbox, also a registry key. Lock status, similar to the AutoBook Filer lock status, you can set that so the settings are no longer able to be altered by the users. Well, all GUI is disabled, only showing in the icon system tray is another option, so they can't even bring that like form up. So an option there. We talked about the enable cleanup rules. You can hide the settings tab altogether. You can hide individual tabs if you don't want them to see the attachment settings tab or the security settings tab. You can hide all of these particular tabs if you prefer. Don't know why, offhand you would want to, but I guess for security reasons that's certainly an option. So these are all things that can be hidden on the email marker. And we'll scroll down here to section 8. I guess that wasn't the section I was looking for. But that's more or less the gist of on how to set up the local marker. It's not complicated as some of the other components. It's pretty straightforward. It works very well. And it is a very handy tool for troubleshooting features. So just to see if we've got everything working properly, let's do a quick demonstration. I'm going to take folder 1006. I'm going to take, let me actually go into my inbox here. I've got a bunch of test emails. So this one, as you can see, says bulk filing. We're going to put it in that 2000, or I keep thinking 2006, 10,006 folder. Real quick, just to show you how that works, add the billing information field. So as you can see, that bulk file carried over with it. So right now the AutoBook filer will skip over it because it thinks it's already been touched because that flag is in place. But I can come here to my 10,006, excuse me again, clear the filed status, and it goes away. So now I can come back in here and right click this, choose file now, or I could just wait for the scheduled time or run all of them, but I'm just going to run this one file. Okay, and you see it says bulked and the category is green. Come over to my email filing server, make sure that service is running. We'll see here a library has been created with a subfolder for me and a folder holding this email. Give the service a few minutes to do its thing. Okay, as you can see now, brief delay. I had to get my system running here. I had some technical difficulties, but it did process, and it listed out here in the log that it saved. We'll come back to the client side, and now that it's saved in DM, we can wait for the marker to run. It's supposed to run every hour, but we can manually run it by hitting start, and it did not find anything. Interesting. And this is why we test everything. Oh, I know exactly why it didn't run. I just talked about this earlier. The date is 3/4/2015, well over 14 days ago. So for testing purposes, I'm going to jack that up to 365. And I don't know what I did to that email. It somehow got deleted. Did I have cleanup enabled? Thought I had not enabled those yet. Oh, I know what happened. I have my purge utility running on the back end as well, so the purger deleted it, so it did not show us the mark happening, so apologize for that. But that's how the purge utility works, for those of you wondering about that. Let's take another one and just test to make sure that this is working properly. And pause while this gets saved. Okay, so now that that has been saved into DM, we can come in here and we'll run the marker again. And you'll see the category this time did change to NDM, put a document number, and put the author ID. That's the metadata we asked to use it for. So this is how the client-side AutoBulk filer and email filing marker work. Further videos will discuss the additional add-in features such as quick file and file the eDOCS and some other features, as well as how to configure the email filing configuration tool with the email filing assistant.